Right. Normally it's just boring, so they're listening to your bio, but I had a cookie this time, so much better. So I do apologize for my lateness. I hate being late. I just can't stand it. I always like to get places early, probably because I am an anxiety person, so I like to get there early and get used to everything. So, but 71 does not always cooperate with my wishes. So I do appreciate that I called ahead and they helped me find parking real quick, and it was good. But when bad things happen, it sometimes is good to be a mindfulness teacher, because you kind of reminded, like, oh, this is why I teach this. You know, this is exactly why. And so, you know, that's the point, is that life does not always go as planned. So I wrote this book. I published it last year. It is my first book that I wrote on my own. It is self-published. It is something that I kind of always wanted to do, and then as life went on, it became more and more something that actually looked like it could be a reality. So I want to talk a little bit about the book, and like sort of I did this question and answer style. If you have questions though, I love it when audience ask me questions. It's one of my favorite things. Like, oral argument is probably my favorite thing to do as a lawyer, so please don't hesitate to ask. No questions are dumb, and frankly, like if you want to ask questions about writing as much as mindfulness or meditation, I love those too. So please don't be shy. So there's a little bit of lag between this.
All right,
so yeah.
Where can we purchase your book?
So it's on Amazon. It is also on Barnes & Noble, and it is on bookshop.org if you can't stand Amazon, which is basically Ingram Spark. So that's like just a different thing. I think they're the price all the same. It might take a little bit longer to get it from like Ingram Spark or something like that, but they're in all of those locations. If you want to support a local bookstore, I was a Carmichael's fan when I was down here at school. I think what you would have to do is probably go to the bookstore and see if they would order it for you. But that's something worth doing. All right, so I went to U of L for college and law school. So I love coming back to Louisville. It feels like a second home to me. I really liked it. I wanted to stay, and my mom convinced me to apply at a law firm for a clerk position back home. And I actually ended up liking it, and I very begrudgingly went back home to practice. But I feel like Louisville is my second home. I do local government employment and litigation up at a firm in Cincinnati. And that is what I've primarily done most of my practice. So a lot of it has been local government. One thing that kind of is an interesting tie-in from the practice standpoint is I started doing special education pretty early in my practice and really developed a specialty with it. And I do think like the understanding of mental health and disability, and understanding just the idea of supporting people and individually supporting people and seeing what can happen with that, I think did contribute to my later interest in mindfulness. I'll also say I was a philosophy major here at U of L. I had some really wonderful teachers, and I do think my philosophy interest is actually really where my interest in mindfulness came from. Very accidentally, I got stuck in a Barnes & Noble with my mom one night, and my mom was shopping and talking with everyone as she does. And this was after I graduated from law school, and I went and found this philosophy section and picked up a book on Buddhism, because I had not really studied Asian philosophy in college, and I just read it, and it was really compelling to me. And that's eventually where I started exploring mindfulness. So it kind of came from my experience in school as well. I've been active with the bar here in Kentucky, Ohio, and my local bars, and I do think that's a big part of, why I do the thing I do, because I think I do think it's lawyers' job a little bit to try to help improve the profession and, help build, events and things to help people find community in the profession. And so that is part of my history. I have these two little girls, and very much so my meditation practice came out of me being a mom. And I talk about both of the experience of my first daughter and my second daughter, and being pregnant with them and having them, and that really influenced some of what I came to understand. My first daughter, I had postpartum depression with her, and it was a red flag and kind of got me started to focus more on myself. My second daughter, I had an emergency C-section, and that was where I kind of had a big interest in compassion, because when I had her and had that experience, I had what I now know was a compassion response, where I felt very calm and steady, even though I was terrified, sleep deprived, on all kinds of drugs. And I was very steady and stable and stayed calm. And I was kind of wondering, what the heck? Why was I kind of a mess with the first one and so solid with the second? And the difference was compassion. So that was when I started to explore compassion more specifically. I do talk about both of those in the book as well. I became a certified mindfulness. I'm also a certified yoga teacher. I don't really teach yoga so much, but I wanted to understand that perspective of mindfulness as well. During the pandemic, I was a little bored and going crazy at home, and I had been teaching and talking about mindfulness for a while. I got certified, and then I founded the blog then. So the blog's about 3 years old. And so some of what I've done is also a response to just life situations and being able to, find something I enjoy out of the kind of nooks and crannies and, lulls of normal life and practice. And so my blog actually was founded within a few weeks of me obtaining the certification to teach mindfulness. I did it kind of as a celebration, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go. So now I have passed 150 posts, and I just got 10,000 views for the year of 2023, which is not a ton from a blog standpoint. But the first year was about 5,000 or so. Last year was about 7. And so to kind of really bump that up, I was really happy about that. So building and growing little things, is part of what you find you have to do when you start writing. And that experience with the blog is also partly what ended up leading to the book. So people ask me this all the time, and I always have, I never have the same answer. There's so many reasons that I did write the book that I'm not sure I can just give you one answer for it, but I kind of want to sum it up here. So one thing is that I've always liked writing, and one of the things I do talk about in the book, and what I do think is really helpful from a mindfulness perspective, is that meditation can help with overthinking. Does anyone deal with overthinking a lot? Yeah. I think it's a common problem for a lot of people. Research says it's actually a specific problem for women, and I think lawyers in particular will really kind of add on to those risk factors because of our jobs. A lot of times we solve our problems, we think, at least through our mind and through our plans and through our scheming and through the ability to control. And so sometimes I don't think we're always aware of it, but we often implicitly believe those thoughts. So when I started meditating, I started to get a handle on the thoughts. But what it didn't do is make the thoughts go away. What instead happened is that I could just let the thoughts be there. A lot of times when I sit now, I just sit. I don't do a lot of specific practices. I just kind of sit, and I kind of think of it as open gym for my mind. The thoughts can come, they can play, they can do some shooting drills or whatever. I don't have to deal with it, and I just kind of let them go. And what I started to notice, though, when I did that, was that these thoughts were actually ideas. And they were actually ideas to write. And it can be subtle, and it can take a while to recognize it, because sometimes an idea might just be like the little image, right? An image of something that matters, and you don't quite know why. Or it might be maybe a phrase or a strand of words kind of together that keep kind of coming back. And you're like, what's that? Well, when you sit down at a computer and start with that, it's off to the races and the words just come, right? And so my meditation practice and my writing were just kind of linked. I created this space where I could see the ideas for what they were, and then I could also allow them to kind of come out as they went and not control them so much. And part of my situation also with the overthinking, so does anyone journal? Yeah. And do you show anybody when you journal? No. I have the opposite issue. I never really have journaled too much, except for keeping track of notes or something like that, or when I'm really angsty and I just want to let stuff out. But in general, I have to publish it. I have to get rid of it, because if I don't, it's still really in my brain. I'm still really thinking about it. And that was one of the best things for me, because when you start publishing, you can start to build a community. You can start to get feedback on what works and what doesn't. And you can start to also have this thing where you let go of a piece and then move on to the next one. And so because I did that, it helped me really evolve as a writer pretty quickly, and actually find my voice where I wasn't talking just as a lawyer, just about the facts, but I could start to tell stories. use writing that sounded more like the way we speak to each other. Come in, don't be shy if you're here for the speech. And so that was one thing that, for me, my meditation practice and my writing really went together. But because I always liked writing, I wanted to do it, and I wanted to get one done. And I had been writing for a long time, and I had not yet done a book, even though that was kind of a goal. And I noticed I was turning 39, and then I would be turning 40, which I did in February. And so I said, Claire, that's a pretty good reason to get going. Like, get the book done. It doesn't have to be a perfect one. It probably won't be your last. Get it done as your first book, and let's see what happens. And so I signed up actually for a coaching program to get my book done and to learn how to take short form content. I had mostly done LinkedIn posts, blog posts and things like that, and figure out how to expand it into something cohesive but much longer form. But the real purpose for this book is that I started meditating back in like 2012, 13-ish area at time. And at that point, there was more and more research coming out. There was more popular discussion of meditation, but we didn't have the things that we do now, like 10% Happier, Headspace, Calm. Those apps did not exist. There were some podcasts that had some meditations on them, but not a whole lot. And so I was kind of going on my own to learn the practices. I know that there are some other books. There's tons of other books out there on meditation, and there's even some out there for lawyers. And I was somewhat dissatisfied with the ones that existed. I thought they were overly formal. I thought they were written by people who didn't still practice law. And not that that's bad, but it kind of suggests that you learn these practices and then you get out, right? And I wanted to kind of talk to practicing lawyers. In general, they were also written by people from the West Coast, or maybe the East Coast, but usually the West Coast. And so I thought, somebody from the Midwest who's actually practicing, it wasn't big law, somebody that's different with a different voice and perspective to offer just a new entry. I also found that some of the other books were more like dressing up with meditation. Let's try this practice on, let's try this practice on, let's try this one on. Let's do mantra today and, yoga the next day. And I can understand why. I think that's sort of how the program MBSR goes, if you've ever tried that one. But I didn't really like that. I wanted something that was more cohesive as a practice and really focus more on building the essential skills that we need as lawyers. So not to criticize other works, but just they offer one thing and I just wanted to offer a different thing. So I'm not sure if you can read this whole quote. But this is from chapter 1, where I talk about what is a badass lawyer, why do you want to be one, and I just say that this is why I wrote the book. And I know, like, with what's going on in the world right now, and I know sometimes I encounter people when I go speak to lawyers, and they're kind of like, lawyers are so stressed out, they're dealing with all this stuff, and you want us to sit still and frigging meditate? Like, are you kidding me? Like, what is that going to solve?
Yeah.
And I get that, but I wanna say something kind of in response to that. Like, that's true, and that is a real feeling that I can't argue with. And honestly, it's probably the feeling that kept me from doing it for a long time. So one thing I'll say is that it's not the only thing you can do. But first of all, you don't meditate to check out. I think a lot of times it's positioned that way. I do think there are some gurus and influencers out there who talk about meditation as a calming strategy. It has that capacity. It can help you do that. When you refine the skill, particularly of breath work or body work, it has that strong capacity. And that's one of the powerful things I like about it. But fundamentally, meditation is not about getting calm. It's about getting clear. It's about seeing what's there. And when you can do that, and when you have a greater capacity to deal with stress, that means you have a greater capacity to act in challenging, difficult circumstances where we need people to act. If you're the person in the room who has a different idea and everyone else is missing it, do you have the courage to speak up, right? It's so easy to not do it. It's so easy to think they're not going to listen anyway. But do you have that courage? And some of these practices give you that courage. And when I talk about compassion and I talk about kindness, I want you to understand that that is connected to courage indifferently. Our connections to other people and our ability to bring kindness to difficulty, that is courage, okay? So I'm not talking about inaction, and I'm not talking about checking out. I'm talking about being able to care for yourself enough and see your connection to everyone else around you enough that you can engage in wise action. Anyone want to argue with me on that? All right, the title. Anyone have any guesses on how I came up with the title? Or cynical theories? So, to be cynical, one reason was to get your attention. It was that. I mean, I wanted to get people's attention. I think when I have taught mindfulness, a lot of what I've tried to do is change people's minds about it. They have ideas about it. Many cases, I find that many people are very educated about the science and the understanding of the benefits. So I usually don't lead with that, because I think they already know a lot of these things. The things that I think get in the way for people are that they think they can't do it because they can't clear their mind, they can't be calm all the time, they're not that kind of a person, all of those things. So I wanted to get people's attention and let them know that you can be a real person, you can have a sense of humor, you can still be a jerk sometimes, even if you meditate. You don't have to be a saint. You can maybe even cuss a little bit sometimes. No, I wanted to get people's attention and say this is a little bit different than maybe what you heard or what you thought about. And I kind of wanted to emphasize the power of these practices, but also their humanity. And part of the book, a big part of the book, is de-emphasizing perfection and formality, okay? I really don't talk, so the MBSR program I mentioned is something that we owe a whole lot to. It helped us understand the power of mindfulness from a scientific basis, but I fundamentally disagree with its training recommendations. Has anyone done MBSR?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, could you explain what that is?
So mindfulness-based stress reduction is a mindfulness program created by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is like the scientific father of mindfulness in the West. He's a researcher. He's got some really great books and really great meditations out there. So I am not criticizing Jon Kabat-Zinn. I do disagree with the training. I think MBSR is a terrible way to learn mindfulness. It's a great exposure to some different practices, but I find the course to be very dry and clinical. And also the thing I really hate is that it says you should start meditating at 45 minutes a day. 45 minutes a day. I do about 30 every day, and I've been meditating 10 years. And when I do retreats and I have to sit a little bit longer, 40 to 50 minute range, that's a little bit hard. So I think 45 minutes is just a huge amount. My book recommends you start with one, and work your way up, because that's exactly what I did. And we're lawyers, we're busy, we don't have necessarily time for 45 minutes. The reason MBSR did 45 minutes is that they want to make sure that people are getting an adequate dose of meditation to be able to see benefits in a short period of time so that they can track it for research. They did that, and they've established that in many, many scenarios at this point. So it's really important that they did. But now some of the research is looking at, well, if small increments of time of mindfulness can help you, how small? And that's where the research is kind of going. Or do you even need a formal sitting practice? Can micro bursts of mindfulness practices throughout your day be enough? So it'll be really interesting to see what that research shows us, but that's what that program is. So my book is a little bit of reaction to that.
I wanted to emphasize how important I think it is that you are working with a realistic legal paradigm. And what I like about the word badass, I remember when you first did that, lawyers I think most lawyers go into profession because they want power. They want power in all different ways, monetary, professionally, they want to be seen as powerful people in their community. And so using a term like badass is, I think, good in terms for lawyers. I think the other thing is, like you've discussed in the past, with so many practices that have been brought before, like even, I love Ty, and he has a lot of YouTube videos on meditation and stuff like that. It's kind of like, a lot of people think of it as, well, if I decide to leave the law and kind of sit somewhere under a tree, then I can do that. but there's not something that I can really incorporate into my real, life. And that's why I really praise your effort to make it, very realistic and to make it, short, and understand that most people see traditionally some of the other yoga, meditation, mindfulness practices as making you more weak and not retaining your power as a lawyer. And this, I think you put it in, this will make you more powerful, not only as a person, but as a lawyer too, which is why I like the fact that you wanted to, as a practicing lawyer, write a book about it, as opposed to people who've left the profession, so thank you for that.
You are setting me up, Kimberly, so, and the other thing is, I would not have used the word badass lawyer if it wasn't authentic to me. I mean, I just wouldn't have, it's not just getting attention, so, I wrote a blog post, and this quote, remember to load, first of all, this quote might be a little hard to read, but this is from a blog post I wrote, during the pandemic. I had an injunction, case relating to schools, and, they wanted to force the schools, full open every day, despite CDC recommendations at the time, and the fact that the staff were not vaccinated yet. So I was lead counsel on that case, and my position was, we wanna open as fast as possible, we just wanna do it safely. I knew the judge was against me on that. I had prior experience with the judge on COVID issues. I knew politically where he was gonna go. I knew he was not a fan of public education. I just knew it. I mean, this is not like really even so much criticizing the judge, it's the fact that I knew. And so I knew we were probably going to just get a new one almost no matter what I did. That was the case. And so I really struggled with that case. I was terrified of it because, we were gonna get this terrible order. It was gonna be on my watch. Everyone was gonna be unsafe, and it was gonna be my fault, and I really struggled with it the first few days. And so I honestly did meditate for 3 days, and I did a practice called loving kindness, which we might try if we have time. But it was essentially just me sitting with the fact that I was afraid, and slowly opening to this idea that I was afraid. Because when you're lead trial counsel, you can't be afraid, right? You gotta be the general, telling everyone what to do, telling your clients what you need, coming up with a theory and a strategy, writing, maybe writing a brief, but putting on a presentation. You weren't allowed to be afraid then. And of course, to my client, I didn't tell my client I was afraid, but I was, and I had a real hard time. And what I kind of sat with and ultimately realized is, I cannot win the case if winning the case means stopping the judge from entering an order. But I kind of was like, well, I'm pretty good at being a pain in the ass when I want to. And so I kind of shifted. I was like, okay, I can't convince him, but can I convince him to slow this down? Can I make them jump through all the hoops they have to jump through before he enters the order and slow it down? There was legislation pending at the time that probably would have mooted it. It did moot it ultimately. I told the judge to wait, he didn't want to. So we went through it. I wrote one of the best briefs I ever did, and we ended up getting enjoined, but the judge delayed the effectiveness of the order, and then legislation came down and it mooted it. And so ultimately, great result for the client. Sucks that we had to go through it. It was a mess, but that experience and going through that, helped me understand that, yeah, I was terrified, but I also did awesome. And it is not to say that every case you can always push through fear, and every case you can just use meditation to get through it. It is to say that sometimes just learning to sit with some of these emotions that sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge, it does give you a power, because then you can choose how you respond to it, and you can honestly learn how you can go into fear and deal with it effectively.
Claire, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you were learning how to meditate, were you also working with a therapist at the time? Because, and this is why I asked that question. So I've always been scared of meditation because until a lot of work that I've done in my own personal life recently, I've always been terrified of my own thoughts, actually. And I did not want to sit down in a place where I had to I really was in a place of avoidance. I was like, I don't want to think about all this stuff. So I'm going to do everything I can in my life to avoid thinking about the hard things, right? And my thought process was pretty distorted about a lot of issues as well, and really took a lot of professional help to deal with it. So you sound like you were able to work through a lot of that stuff by kind of sitting with it, or were you working with a therapist at the time as well to help you figure out where your thought process was and work through those things? Or did you did you find meditation, the more you did it, you kind of were able to do it yourself?
Yeah, so, and you're actually bringing up a couple things. First of all, I'm not anti-therapy or anti-medication. And I think that meditation can work in conjunction with many modalities of mental health treatment, including therapies. When I first had postpartum depression with my first daughter, I did go to a therapist, and I had to because I was in a state of crisis. I was attempting to meditate then, and I would just end up, crying in a dark room by myself, and that was not good. So I do not tell people who are actively dealing with sort of a crisis situation to start meditating then. However, once I got past that and actually started to stabilize, then I did start meditating, and actually it was at a really busy time in my practice, and it helped me right away. In terms of dealing with some of those thoughts, like if you do something like go on a retreat, you will have teachers there, and you will have other people there, and that'll be a huge support. So they do usually have safety practices at retreats and things, because when you sit down, stuff comes up. And stuff comes up that you didn't even know was there, right? And that you've been trying to avoid, and it's terrible. And when you're like in your head, it feels like it's overwhelming. But there are people out there. The other thing I kind of want to, another periods of my time, I've gone to therapy shortly to kind of go through specific issues. I mean, one time I dealt with it when I was really dealing with a lot of just like angst about work, and I wasn't like depressed then, and it was amazing how much you can get done when you go to therapy to just like work through things. Like, it's amazing the progress you can make when you're not like actively depressed or something. It's wonderful. So give it to yourself as a gift if you can. But I don't see a regular therapist now. I don't find it as useful, because for me, so much of it was thoughts. Like, that was a huge piece of it, where I didn't understand how everything worked. I would cycle around in thoughts. I would isolate myself. So starting to kind of peel back those layers and take action on them really helped me. But one thing I will also say, and you're kind of getting to this, is some people do really struggle with meditation, in particular, like people who have trauma. And odds are most of us in this room have some form of it, and we may not even remember it, because trauma doesn't always happen in our conscious memories. I have gotten some training on trauma-sensitive mindfulness, and so if you do like try the practices and you struggle to focus, or you have a lot of things kind of come up, that might be a time to talk to a mental health therapist before going too much further, or really scale back and find a real gentle way to ease into practices. And I do have some resources about trauma on my blog. I do have a post about what you should be aware of, and I did put like a short video. I have a section on my blog about learn to meditate in 2 minutes, and I did a video on trauma, just mostly as a safety thing, so people understand that there can be ways that you can modify practices to do the meditations that offer more safety and offer more healing, and ultimately allow you gradually to kind of deal with some of the issues that come up. I do think lots of that is true for any new meditator, though. So yeah, I mean, I had support, and I had support from, other people as well, but that's one reason I urge a very gradual progression. I went from 1 to 2 minutes a day and kind of add a minute on here and there. I used guided meditations a lot at first, then I went to a 1-day intensive, then I went to a 2-day thing, and then I went to a 5-day. So I really urge that gradual growth, to give yourself time to adjust. Just like you would, like if you're creating a physical fitness practice and you hadn't exercised in years, you wouldn't start by running a marathon. You'd probably start with a walk around the block. And I think it's kind of the same way. All right, badass lawyer. So this part, so my book is a little bit of a scam, right? I say it'll make you a badass lawyer, but then I say you already are one. And so I want to kind of talk about that. So this book is not really about changing you. I do think that ultimately mindfulness practices probably will lead to some behavior change if you're sincere about it and you're dedicated to practice enough, because I think when you start to see clearly your patterns, you also start to see the ones that don't serve you, and you can start to change them. But that's changing your behavior, right? It's not fundamentally changing your character, right? And so what I kind of think with mindfulness and compassion, and they kind of go together, is that really the practices don't change who you are, but they let who you are flow a little more naturally. And so you're not fighting against life so much, and you can also bring kindness in more often. And so really, what I have found is the practices have helped me be who I am authentically much more than trying to be somebody I'm not. And so when I say working with you as a human, mindfulness and compassion are things you already have. You would not have made it this far without them, okay? You already have them, but they're both things that can be trained up, and when you train them up more, you have a little bit more capacity to deal with difficulty in a skillful way. Okay, these are quotes from the book. So basically, we're lawyers that take care of ourselves as we take care of clients. And that is very basic. And I hope most of us do that. But how much training did you really get in your life to take care of yourself? How many prompts in your daily life do you get to take care of yourself? I mean, maybe some of the Instagram like things, make sure you make time for self-care and all that. Like maybe some of those, that's starting to happen more. But I don't think our culture really sets us up for self-compassion and really taking care of our own needs. I think our culture sets us up to be busy and distracted and kind of running around serving interests that maybe aren't always our own. I don't even think our culture prompts us too much to even ask what we really want, and always rewards us for taking action to serve our own interests. So that is a fundamental piece of it. But the other piece is down here where, I think that sometimes people come to mindfulness practice because they want calm and they want peace, and they want to feel that right away. But sometimes what the practices really can do is give you the skills to find that and bring that, to show up with that, even when life doesn't throw it to you, right? We'll talk about loving kindness a little bit later. One of my phrases in loving kindness, so you can actually change the phrases. The phrases are, the traditional phrases are, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe, and may you be at peace. I've made my own, and one of mine is, may I greet my life with joy. And I used to hate the word joy. I was like, you walk in someone's room, their living room, and they have a big joy thing, and then maybe a sign that says live, laugh, love, and you just want to like throw up in your mouth a little bit. You're like, gross. But joy is something that actually really matters, especially in a hard job. And the more I started to sort of look for positive things and good things, the better off I am. I was sitting in traffic on 71 late for this, and I saw these actual individual humans doing construction on the side of the road. And I was like, they're working for their livelihood, for their family. They're helping make the roads better, and I'm just late for an appointment. So you can kind of remember these things just in your daily life and help you see the positive that's around you when we get a whole lot of reminders, especially this week, what is going on wrong in the world. Yeah.
Well, while you are a brilliant legal mind, is one of the things, the basic concepts that you are working with in your book is that we tend to think, I think in our society, black and white. We either have chaos or we have calm. But you're saying you can have joy and clarity within the chaos. They're and. So you can be chaotic, because being a lawyer is chaotic for me almost all the time. But I can find joy, and it can be and in the chaos. Like you sitting on 71, you're able to find joy, even though there was something that was happening that was making it. And that's the and. It's not either or, it's and. So thank you.
Yeah, it's and it's also not pressuring yourself to do it, right? You gotta watch some of this control thing, right? Where you're trying to push yourself to feel a certain way, right? Some of it is also just recognizing that this is bad, but also then when something's bad, not beating yourself up for taking care of yourself and maybe doing something joyful and fun so that you can get back into living your life and doing what you can to help. But yeah, that's a good point, Kimberly. All right, what is compassion? Anyone have a definition for compassion they want to throw out? No? All All right, so compassion, I think a lot of people think compassion is empathy. They think it's just kindness, they think it's being nice. But I like to use, I'm a lawyer, I like to use the real definition. And so compassion is actually something that has been studied quite extensively. And so the clinical definition is basically presence with difficulty plus the willingness to help, right? And I want to break that down a little bit. So how often do you respond to difficulty with a willingness to help? Is that your first thing that you're going to do? Most of the time, I mean, my natural instincts would be I see difficulty and I'm like, what did you do wrong? Like, how did you let yourself get in that situation, right? We want to judge it, or why me? Why am I stuck in traffic? Why am I late for this thing, right? That is the normal human response, is just to judge it, resist it, try to control it and turn it good and force it. But compassion is the presence with suffering. So not changing it, not mentally fleeing from it, but being there with it and remain willing to help. And for anyone with a savior complex like me, it also means the willingness to help, not that you actually can do it in all cases, right? So one time I was meditating and a dog outside was barking to get in, and it was like a kind of a cold night. And I figured the dog was gonna get in, so I wasn't really concerned for his well-being, but I was I could feel like being sad for the dog because he wanted in. I have a dog, so I know. There's a sad puppy, and I could feel it. And I did sort of have a response, and it was a situation where I could it was low grade enough where I could really watch it clearly kind of progress. And it was kind of hard for me to sit with that for a little bit, to feel that sadness and that inability to truly go help the dog. But then after a while, I noticed I feel great. Because when you have a compassion response, it actually protects you first. Hormones get released which are beneficial to you, oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin, which are rewarding but also satisfying and connect you. And so you actually will feel good when you do this. You have to go through some of the difficulty at the beginning, and that's one reason I urge gradual growth with it. But it can be a really amazing process. So it's not empathy. So empathy is when we feel other people's feelings. And it also can be cognitive empathy, where we understand or can imagine the situation they're in. There's a huge difference between empathy and compassion. And one is that empathy spotlights on individuals, but compassion is for everybody. And it can be for yourself. You can't really have empathy for yourself so much. It's kind of difficult. But you can have and cultivate self-compassion. And the other thing is that empathy is not grounded by mindfulness. So mindfulness and compassion work together. Compassion and non-judgment is part of mindfulness. And then awareness and stability is part of compassion. Okay? So compassion is grounded by mindfulness in the sense that you can be present with suffering, but you don't necessarily absorb it all. Because when you absorb it all, that is empathic overwhelm, and that's where you're not necessarily going to be very effective to help, even if you want to. And that's a real situation. That's not a time to judge yourself if that happens. That's normal and it's human. But when you can train in compassion, you can learn some strategies to sort of avoid the empathic overwhelm situation and maybe be more effective. So as I was talking about, so when you do have a compassion response, you are the first person to benefit from it. We often think of compassion for others. It can be for ourselves, but when you have compassion for someone else, it benefits you physically. You feel better in the process. And so that's one of the really remarkable things about it. It's protective. Did you have your hand raised?
No, sorry.
All right, kind of already got to the last one. All right. So anyone know what this is? What's number one? Just a cave. It's an empty cave. So this is an analogy I use in the book. So mindfulness by itself is just awareness. So it's just this capacity to receive information in the mind, okay? And like the news and almost everybody wants to talk about mindfulness. But the real juice and the real magic is mindfulness and compassion, okay? So compassion is this ability to not judge, not react to things, maybe even bring kindness in. And so that's why you got like a nice cozy couch, a blanket, a little tapestry, a fire. It's the difference between living in this cave versus living in this one, right? Which would you pick? You pick number 2. Many of us sort of automatically reside in number 1. And we're even told number 1 is the best. But it's really not, right? We don't necessarily want to live in a cave where our minds are clear and empty. We want to live in the world where we have some connection, some ability to find haven when we need to, and then the ability to reach out and connect with others when it's useful too. And also go support other people, because that's really what we're made to do. So I use this because that's kind of how I explain it in the book, the difference between mindfulness and compassion, and why both are essential, and why I kind of have the program set up the way I do. Okay, so this is where I show the math, right? So mindfulness plus compassion equal badass. So this is my thought process. I don't know if a logic professor would come in and rip this apart, but hopefully there aren't any here. So mindfulness is just presence with life as it is, not judging, not reacting, just being with it. Compassion is the presence with suffering plus the willingness to help. And lawyers, what do? We deal with suffering. Our job is to help, right? We have to see it clearly too. We can't, some lawyers probably do, and we've probably experienced it, right? That they deal with the facts they want to deal with, but they ignore the ones they don't. But that's not necessarily super effective lawyering, right? We got to deal with all the facts as they are, including maybe our client who is maybe not as grateful as we hope they would be, and try to help them. That's our job. And so to be able to see things clearly and deal with all the emotions and the judgments and the reactions that come can be really, really helpful to us. So my method that I have in the book, so it's basically 3 chapters of intro information, understanding some of the basic vocabulary and information, and why mindfulness helps, why compassion helps, why you might want to do this. And then the middle section is chapters that talk about actual practices. So the first practice is a breath-focused practice. So have many of you, I bet, have meditated. Have you tried a practice where they say focus on your breath? When your mind wanders, you come back to it? Is it easy? No, but it's simple. And your breath is always with you, and your breath is the one thing that you can do besides take medication or drink a beer to actually exert some control over your nervous system. Because your breath, your diaphragm, is connected to your nervous system directly. It's literally linked to it. So whenever you can modulate your breath and pay attention to it, that gives you some capacity right there to learn how to calm yourself down and regulate what's going on. So the second piece is body scan. Has anyone done body scan? You might have done it at a yoga studio. It's where you connect with physical sensations in your body. Has anyone tried like yoga nidra or anything like that at a yoga? Yeah, Kimberly's done it all. That's another form of body scan. There's different ways you can do it, but it's really just being with the sensations in your body, not thinking about it, I'm not analyzing it, but feeling the sensations in your body. I know when I started doing these practices, I did not I had like virtually no, real relationship with my body. I did not pay attention to what was going on. If I had a headache, I took aspirin and made it go away. I didn't want to think about it. And one of the first things that happened with my experience with meditation is actually the first benefit I got was that it made my headaches go away. I used to have like headaches, neck pain a lot. I did not know how much it was stress related until I started meditating, and it would kind of just dissipate and go away, or at a minimum feel better. And so that was honestly the first reason I kept going. And it was a huge thing because then I started to notice, when I felt stress, like I didn't understand how much stress was kind of with me all the time. And then it started to go away, and I could, understand better like what I needed to do to feel better. And body as well is really important because where do your emotions live? Do you know the answer to this question? Yeah, you're kind of pointing to specific parts of your body, but they are, in many cases, sensations, or at least they have a sensory component. They often have a thought component too, but separating that out and taking one by one helps you figure out and manage them. And sometimes you don't have to do anything, you just have to feel it for a second and then let it go. But emotional regulation and understanding, it comes from awareness of your body. Joy is a practice that I have added in as well because it is something that kind of, I think, naturally goes from breath awareness and body awareness to understanding positive emotions and really cultivating those. And so I think, like many of us lawyers, we deal with a lot of difficulty and stress in our lives, but so we don't have as much, focus on the positive. And when we do practices that talk about it, it for one feels really good, but I think helps us look for positive things and balance things out. And that really matters because our minds on their own are negative. They kind of slant and skew negative. And so kind of tipping the scales back the other way is important. But it's also something that kind of connects you and helps you understand positive emotions, and then kind of segues into loving kindness practice. So loving kindness is a practice where you sit and you bring to mind people and you send them well wishes. It starts with yourself, then it moves out to loved ones, then difficult people, and then the whole world, right? And it's a gradual practice of doing that. And what you do is connect with those actual feelings. And it's a really transformational practice, and there's a whole lot of research about it. All right. So I'm getting to 1 o'clock, so if you guys need to go or anything like that, just let me know. So the last thing is that people are like, yeah, I read what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but I can't do it, right? And I have like many thoughts in response to this. And one is, you don't have to. Like, it's not the only thing. There's tons of other practice. There's actually tons of other mindfulness practices. So there's other things you can do. And if you have something else that really helps you manage stress, like, great, then maybe you don't need it, right? I mean, you don't have to do it. So let's just take that off the table. But this I can't do it thing, I think there's two problems with that. What is I, and what is it, right? When you say you can't meditate, are you saying you can't meditate for 45 minutes? I can't either, right? Are you saying you can't meditate for 1? Are you saying you can't breathe? Like, what exactly are you saying, right? So I think one thing is to reconsider what this practice actually is and what it has to be. Because honestly, there are days where I can't do 30 minutes, but maybe I can do 5. And that's enough. That's my practice, and it keeps my habit going, and that's enough for the day. So reconsider that. Another thing, and I kind of talking about this here, and I did not get into this concept in the book. There's a concept that comes from Buddhism and that you will, I think, learn and see if you do meditate, and it's called not self. Anatta is the Sanskrit word. So it basically means our identities are not as solid and stable as we think they are. And honestly, we get a lot of suffering that comes from fighting to protect those identities and preserve them. And when you're talking about lawyers and our reputations and how much we get from being a partner at this firm or an associate at this firm, I mean, I just changed jobs last year, and I can tell you, knowing about not self, I mean, it just came up so many times. So this idea of I can't meditate, I think it's an idea that I'm a stable self and I am someone that is just not my character to do it, right? And I don't necessarily always think that's true. Like, you know yourself better, so if it's not for you now, that's fine. 2 years from now, who knows, right? So sort of just getting at like who you think you are and who you might want to be might not necessarily be the same thing. So a lot of the book is talking about debunking myths and raging against the perfectionist machine. So you don't have to be perfect to do these practices, and honestly, you won't be. If you do them long enough, you won't be perfect. You're gonna have times where you can't. You might have the flu and your lungs feel so bad that you can't sit and breathe for a while. Stuff in life happens. So just don't let go of the perfectionist idea entirely and focus on building something that works for you instead. I really advocate with starting small, playing around, taking your time. I think one of the reasons that I've, gotten some of these certifications is that I get bored and I wanna learn something new. And I don't think that's entirely bad, I think, finding new modalities, trying them out, sitting with the group or sitting by yourself, using an app for a while and then not. I think mixing that up is actually really good for practice. You build skills and you learn things, and it'll keep you going. And another thing I'll say is, I did just write about this week. Many of us can learn meditation on our phone than on our own. But it's actually a whole lot better if we can find a group to sit with. And so one thing I'll say is I'm involved with a group called Mindfulness and Law Society now, and I've been guiding some meditations. They do have like some free sits you can come to on Zoom if you can't find anything else, but I do know that there are some Dharma and Zen centers in the area that you can check out. So, and some of the wellness communities and wellness like committees with the bar and stuff have some things as well you can do. I know it takes time, I know we don't always have it, so it's not pressure, but if you get that opportunity to try it, I just do encourage it. All right, so, yeah, I don't know if anyone has questions. We are at 1 o'clock, so I'm not sure if we have time for a practice, but.
I have a real quick question.
Yeah.
So how did you find time to write the book? And how did you schedule and set aside time for yourself that you were just gonna do this because you've got small kids and you're practicing law, so how did you balance time in order to do that?
So for me, for this particular book, I changed firms and I asked for some time to transition. And it was a real emotional process. So I actually just decided, I was in the program, I'd already kind of started the process. I felt like I was ready to go. So I decided if I'm gonna take time and I'm gonna wanna not think about like my law practice and who I'm gonna be tomorrow, it would be great to just write the book. So I wrote this in like 6 weeks. Actually, I wrote this in another book in like 6 weeks because I wrote way too much. And my coach said, this is 2 books, Claire, this isn't one. And actually when he said that, I kind of freaked out. He was like, this won't work, we'll have to cut it, we'll have to do all this. I freaked out, and then he said, no, I'm not saying that it's bad, I'm saying you have to write 2 books. And that made me feel better, I don't know why. So, but I'll say, like, I was able to get like a huge amount done in a short period of time because of that. But like, I write a post a week most of the time. And I have much busier circumstances. So I think like some of it is, I was in the habit and I was trained with writing fast. I was also trained to not judge my stuff immediately. Like I write a bunch of stuff, a bunch of words come out, they fly everywhere, I let them go. And then I come back later and I edit and I put it together. And I've learned to do that. I think that's the biggest, honestly with writing, so I'm working on a treatise right now for LexisNexis, and I'm the editor. I'm not writing the chapters, and I was talking to this chapter author yesterday. She's real smart, she's done this practice for a long time, from New York, knows her stuff, and she was like flipping out about it being Lexis, and it's too much, and she's a solo, and these other big firm people have all these associates that can throw out everything. I was like, calm down about all that. All that's just nonsense that's your mind's trying to tell you you can't do it. You know this stuff, you signed up for this chapter because you know this chapter. I was like, the part of writing that takes time is not really always the work. It's the hand wringing and the angst and all that other crap where you get to a question point that you don't want to answer this question, so you stop typing. Right? And so I think some of the practices have really helped me kind of move forward from that and just not kind of get caught up in it, or learn that when I'm at that point, that's when I need to talk to somebody or get some help or drill down on it more. Anyone else?
Oh, I've got one more question. So when you meditate, do you go to a quiet place and do you try and cut everything up, go to a dark room at the far corner of your house, or how do you do that, managing your household and finding that time?
Anymore, I do it after I put my daughters down to bed. Usually right after. I have to get up now at 6 o'clock for my daughter's bus, so I started meditating before bed. And if I fall asleep, then it's just time to go to bed. I just let it be done. But I have like a little cushion behind a big wardrobe in my room, so it's like my little corner, like Cinderella kind of deal. And yeah, it's not anything fancy. Like, I'm not the person to decorate anything. That's just not me. If that makes you sit down, if you have this lovely space that you can put on Pinterest and it's amazing, if that gets you there, do it. But I can't tell you how to do it because I'm terrible at that stuff. Anything else?
But I wanted to just, as you were talking, I was thinking about the difference between being codependent, which I am totally codependent, versus compassion, because you were talking about, you see the presence of, you're in the presence of suffering and you have the willingness to help. Well, a codependent is that. I am always putting myself in places where people are suffering. Like, I seek it out, like, where are all the problems? And then I'm willing to help. But the difference between codependence and compassion is, in codependence, I'm willing to destroy myself to help. I don't think about myself. Like, I'm not in the equation. I just need to remedy the suffering. I'm willing to help. And so I think that's what I've learned through, reading your book and doing some of the practices, is that self first. Put my oxygen mask on first. And that's what compassion is really saying. Self, you have to be able to do those things and still survive. Well, thrive. Not just survive, but thrive. And I think our society is taught to be codependent. And then you become a lawyer and you become almost even more codependent. And I'm not talking about being selfish or ego. I'm talking about really taking care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's been the big change in my mind from coming from being a super achiever and big law, where literally I was told, we don't care if you're healthy. You keep working. But compassion is like, you have to, and as a leader, leaders, we have to say, you have to be healthy to be a good lawyer, to service your clients. And that's the really fundamental shift, I think, in what you're saying, is we have to take care of ourselves first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I would watch out too for this treating wellness advice like a threat. I do see a lot of stuff out there, like that one meme that went around recently, like, the only people who will notice that you always worked, like, late are your kids, right? And I understand, like, people were sharing that and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel this so much, and I've had to learn how to come back. And I'm like, that's telling you, like, that's threatening you, and that's treating you like a kid with that kind of language. And so I'm resistant to some of that. So when we're talking about you be well, I think, remember, like, to come at it more from a human standpoint. And I'm not saying you're advocating that, I'm just saying, like, that kind of, I've seen that come up a lot. I will say that when you practice some of these practices and you really pay attention to how some of these suffering things feel in your body, and you notice it with some level of refinement, I think it helps you understand how other people feel. But I also think it helps you see, like, sometimes see, like, this is some suffering that I'm creating for myself. And so you also get wisdom in seeing your patterns. So in part, that's what I'm saying when I said you don't sit and check out. You sit so you can check back in, right? And pay attention to what's really going on and make wiser decisions because of it. But the practice of loving kindness, it starts with yourself. Because, so just here's another math question for you. If you're gonna go out into the world and spread all this kindness and joy, it doesn't have to be there. Where's it coming from? If you're not well, if you're not taken care of, how are you gonna do any of that? I do think, and I've experienced as a lawyer, when people are ugly and difficult, most of the time I think it's coming from their own pain. But a lot of times our reaction is to send back ugliness and difficulty instead of, trying to be the adult in the room and avoid some of that, because it's really hard. But I do think taking care of yourself and figuring out really what you need and what matters and sticking with that and letting some other things go is really important. And one thing I'll say is another book that I'm working on right now is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Many of the references are dated. He sounds a little bit like from many decades ago. The practices and the strategies and the focusing on needs and interests when we communicate with other people, and having the courage to say what we need, and focus on that and listen to what they need, it can change a whole lot of things.
Well, Attorney Parsons, thank you so much for a great presentation. Also, Attorney Detmer and Attorney Lister with the Women's Lawyers Association, thanks for your cooperation in putting on this program, and hope to see you again on 26th of October for our next presentation. Thank you. Thank you.